Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. It's good to have you here. I was supposed to be working this morning, but I got a text message saying my shift was cancelled, so kind of happy that I have the day off, and I thought I would use my free time to do another episode. This experience is from a lady called Karen T, and it is on the NDE I website. I was a physical therapist employed in an Alaskan hospital. I had suffered a ruptured disc in my lower back. For a number of weeks, I was treated conservatively with therapy and injections without improvement. During this treatment time, I spent a lot of time in prayer and Bible study. I had previously had back surgery for a ruptured disc in 1977 before moving to Alaska. The doctor I was seeing had advised me that surgery might be needed for this ruptured disc since it wasn't responding to conservative treatment. He wasn't certain whether another lumpectomy would be all I would need or whether it might require a spinal fusion. The spinal fusion would mean a much longer recovery period and the likely possibility that I might no longer be able to work as a physical therapist. Once the decision was reached that surgery was needed and it was scheduled, I began reaching out to members of my church as well as family and friends back in New York State, asking for their prayers and telling them the date of my surgery. I asked that they pray that only a laminectomy would be needed. The morning of my surgery, I remember the nurse was prepping me. She commented that I was the most relaxed person she'd ever seen getting ready for surgery. My husband and 2 young children, ages 9 and 6, were in my hospital room with me when they brought the stretcher to take me to the surgery. They walked with me for a while, and then they were given directions to the waiting room to stay while I was in surgery. They kissed me and left. Once in the operating room, I remember moving over onto the operating room table and having the IV in my arm through which they administered my anesthesia. The next thing I was aware of, I found myself near the ceiling of the corner of the room. I was so high that I was within inches of the ceiling tiles. I became aware of the doctor swearing angrily and ordering nurses to get more bags of blood. I looked back towards the sound and saw my body being flipped from face down to face up on the table. There was quite a commotion of people rushing out and back in, and I remember how pale my face looked. I knew it was my body I was looking at, but felt no alarm or concern. I remember moving effortlessly through the wall of the room and down the hallway, out through the double doors of the operating suite. I couldn't feel any resistance or sense touch when passing through the walls or doors at all. As I drifted down the hallway, I noticed an elevator door opening and a man that I didn't know come rushing past the elevator door. There was something about how he was rushing and his obvious high anxiety that drew my attention. So I watched him, noticing that he was wearing a brownish jacket of some kind and he seemed to be carrying a bag of some sort. He was hurrying toward the doors of the operating suite and slowed near a man by the entry to the operating suite. I don't recall the words of each of them, but I knew the man who had come past the elevator was a surgeon, and he was irritated at having to take time to slow down while the other man didn't think this man in street clothes had any right to enter the operating room suite. I didn't hear the sound of their voices, but I was telepathically aware of each man's thoughts. Unlike in the operating room where I heard the sound of doctors swearing. Once the surgeon passed into the operating suite, I no longer watched him. At this point, I began rising through the ceilings of each floor in the hospital, as though I were being pulled by some force outside my own volition. I continued rising until I passed through the roof itself and found myself in the sky above the hospital. Once outside the hospital, I began to move much more quickly, past the mountain range near the hospital and over the city. I was at the height of an aeroplane. It was at this point that I realized that if I was moving so quickly, I should feel wind rushing past me and I should notice a difference in the temperature of the air. But I felt none of this. I remember rushing into a dark, cave-like area where I continued at high speed for some time before I became aware of a small bright light in the distance in the direction that I was headed. I quickly emerged into this intense light and looked back down at rocky ground below me where my feet should be rugged. Where my feet should be... I'll read that again. I quickly emerged into this intense light and looked down at a rocky ground below me where my feet should be, and a rugged rocky incline to my left. As I looked up the incline, I saw the back of a man proceeding with the incline and telepathically knew I was supposed to follow him. I examined his back and noticed long dark hair tied back with a leather tie, a short toga-like garment in rough off-white material, and sandals of his feet with leather ties wrapping up around his calves. I remember thinking, that's not Jesus. We reached a ledge which opened onto a gorgeous pastoral scene of vivid green grass studded with vibrantly coloured flowers unlike any I have ever seen. There were enormous shade trees scattered around, and beyond the field was a small river about 30 feet across. We came to the bank of the river, and on the opposite bank I saw all my loved ones who had passed away. They were gathered in a large group. I saw my father and my brother first. They were thrilled to see me, as I was to see them. Then I noticed various aunts, uncles, and cousins in the group. Finally, I realized that a few people that I didn't immediately recognize were my grandparents, who had all died before I was born, so I had never even met them. Still, I knew who they were and could telepathically hear them say how much they loved me. I don't remember what any of them were wearing or even what they looked like, but it was definitely their spirits, and there was no doubt in my mind who they were. Before I could go to them and embrace them, my guide who had led me up the incline communicated to me telepathically that I had to go somewhere first and I must follow him. I followed him around a bend in the river until I could see in the distance a beautiful Greek-style building that was vibrantly white with many steps leading up it and huge columns in front of it. Lots of spiritual beings were dressed in vibrant white robes. They were milling around outside, going in and coming out. My guide took me inside where it opened into an enormous library full of tables and lined with books. Many spirits were studying different books and my guide communicated that this hall held the book of life described in the Bible. We continued to a back room where some spiritual beings were sitting in chairs that circled around a screen in the floor that was like a glass-bottomed boat. They communicated that I was to watch my life, and then scenes like a 3D hologram appeared. As I was able to re-experience myself in all events in my life, but just as importantly, I was able to experience the impact of my actions and words on those other people with whom I had interacted. Not one of the spirits condemned me for those painful things I had done or I had not done, but I felt very sorry and sad about them with my own heart. It all seemed to happen very quickly, but had a tremendous impact on me. I got the impression that these spirit beings had been with me and had helped me plan my life before I was born. They let me know that I would be able to return to my life if I chose to do so. Then they showed me through the same screen some of future events in my life if I chose to return to it. Some events would definitely occur, and some events were only possible but not definite. At this point, there is a gap in my memory of what took place. The next thing I was aware of was being shown by my guide, the back doctor, who had operated on me, standing in the waiting room in all his green surgical garbs except his mask, and talking to my husband while the kids sat behind my husband on a couch. I wasn't able to hear any words, only that saw the scene. And then I was shown the image of all the prayers being said by my family and friends, each prayer appearing like a musical note and linking one to the other and reaching upward where I was. Lastly, I saw my daughter's prayer forming the last link to reach us. Suddenly, all the emotional ties to my husband and children rushed back to me, and I remember being a little girl myself when, at the age of 7, I had prayed so urgently that my father wouldn't die. It seemed that my prayer wasn't answered and my father did die. I knew I couldn't let my children grow up without their mother, like I had grown up without a father. Hard as it was to leave the place of overwhelming unconditional love and indescribable peace, I knew I had to return to my life. I was told that the future of things in my life that I had been shown would be removed from my memory, as well as other things I had been shown during my experience, because the choices I would make in my life would be tainted and not truly legitimate choices if I were allowed to retain those memories. I would be granted enough memories to convince my logical mind of the reality of my experience, and I would be given an unmistakable sign that that would be proof of where I'd truly been. With that, the next awareness I had was waking up in the recovery room with my husband and children standing around me. Everything that I have written here was fully in my mind and heart immediately as I greeted my loved ones, and my sign was there too. My sign was not an object, it was the fact that I was completely enveloped in the peace that passeth all understanding, and the amazing unconditional love of God, like an invisible bubble of protection. This amazing sensation, this sign, stayed with me at a tremendous intensity for about 3 weeks to come before gradually fading away. After it was gone, I knew more than I'd ever known anything in my life that my experience was completely real. The gift of God's love and the peace that was with me for all those weeks was the perfect proof and confirmation to my heart that I truly had been in the spiritual realm with God, because it was exactly how I had felt during the entire experience. I know the absolute truth of it to this day. I remained in the hospital for 12 days following my surgery, first in intensive care and later in a regular hospital room. It was touch and go for a while, but I had complete confidence that I would recover, because I knew I'd come back to my life for a reason and was here to stay. At first, I didn't tell my family about my experience. I remember how surprised I was the first time that the surgeon who had saved my life came to my bedside for a visit. We had never met before that time, but he was the same man that I had seen rushing into the operating suite. He had been called on to operate me. Unlike the surgeon who had done my back surgery, who barely came into my room and even then wouldn't even look me in the eye, this surgeon was warm and kind. He clearly cared about me and was pleased that I was recovering well. After about a week after I was home, I had to go to this surgeon's office who had to have my staples removed. My incision ran from my breastbone to my pubic bone, and I had been stapled together. Not long after I was home, but before the return visit to this doctor, I had shared with my husband about my near-death experience and wondered aloud about the message I'd been given about memories that would convince my logical mind of the truth of my experience. I remembered that my experience had included seeing the surgeon arriving the day of my surgery, and that if he could confirm what I had seen when he arrived that day, then it would indeed convince my logical mind of the validity of the experience. Although I already knew it was real because of my sign, I also wanted my husband to have no doubt about it either. So after the surgeon had completed my examination and expressed how pleased he was with my healing so far, I said that I wanted to ask him something about the day of my surgery. I told him that during my surgery on my back, after my artery had been cut and I was bleeding out, that my spirit had left my body and travelled out of the operating room. I told him I'd seen him arriving that day, although I had not known who he was or why he was coming there at the time. I told him about how he was rushing towards the operating suite and how he was wearing street clothes of a brown jacket of some kind and carrying a bag. I saw this being annoyed to be slowed down. I saw him being annoyed at getting slowed down near the doors to the operating room suite, when he was clearly anxious to get into the theatre. Then I asked him if what I saw is what happened that day. His response was, "How did you know that?" I had been at my office when I was paged to come to the operating room. I needed to do an emergency exploratory surgery to locate and stop the bleeding from a vessel that had been cut during a back surgery. I can't remember for certain, but I think he may have asked me what else I had seen and experienced. I believed that I shared a bit about seeing my deceased loved ones and a little bit about my experience, but I don't remember any details I told him. He never clearly said that he was actually wearing what I described. He only said, "How did you know that?" He was clearly blown away, though I think he would have said he wasn't wearing that or he didn't remember it happening that way if in fact it hadn't happened the way I described. I came away convinced that he had confirmed to me the validity of what he had seen. Just the fact that he had come to the hospital in street clothes rather than having been a surgeon on call already at the hospital in scrubs was an unusual circumstance. I knew, and he did confirm that much. It was enough to convince my logical mind and my husband's as well. During the surgery, it had been discovered that I had endometriosis. So I also visited a gynecologist for a follow-up. During that visit, he asked me about my recent abdominal scar. When I explained to him what happened, he exclaimed, "That was you? I was in the adjacent operating room that day and heard all hell breaking loose in there. The air was blue for a while, I can tell you." I didn't share my NDE with him that day, but it confirmed to me what I had seen in the operating room and the swearing I had heard taking place there. That was unusual behaviour for an operating room for sure. After all these years, I have joined IANS and share my story in public for the first time. I was inspired to find the surgeon who had done my emergency surgery, and he is still practicing in Alaska. I wrote to thank him and asked him if he remembered my case and my telling him about my near-death back then. He replied that he did remember me and remembered me sharing my near-death experience with him. Thinking deeply about what I'd seen during my near-death experience and what might be conferred by someone besides me, I spoke to my daughter, who was 9 then and is now 43, and asked her what she remembered of that day. She said that they had waited long past when the doctor had told them he would be out to talk to them, and that she was getting very worried. She said that she heard some noise and saw some man rushing past in the waiting room, acting like something bad had happened. The man rushed towards the elevators. She said that it was the same man later introduced to her as the doctor who had saved my life. She was more worried later when no one had come to talk to them yet. Then the surgeon who had done my back surgery finally came to the door of the waiting room, and her father went over to speak to him. They were so serious that she was convinced that I must be dying. She prayed for me, she said. Before I talked to my daughter, I had asked my husband if he remembered seeing a man coming past the door to the waiting room that day. He then remembered someone rushing past, but said he wasn't directly facing the doorway at the time. My husband had told me shortly after my surgery that the back doctor had come to talk to him in the waiting room that day, but I never asked him what the doctor had been wearing. I knew from what my husband told me at the time that the back doctor had asked my husband for permission to allow the additional surgery to save my life. Until recently, I'd never discussed with my husband what I saw the back doctor wearing that day, and I saw him standing in the doorway of the waiting room. I just recently asked him if he was all dressed in green surgical garb, including a hairnet-type hat on his head, but no mask, and he confirmed that, yes, he had stood in the doorway and was dressed just like that. The surgeon who saved my life recently emailed me confirming that he had come to the hospital the day of my surgery from his office and was dressed in street clothes, though he couldn't remember all these years later what he had been wearing that day or whether he was carrying anything. He did say that he came out of the staircase as he had rushed down the stairs, and he had to slow down to press the button to open the automatic doors to the operating room suite. He didn't recall another man being present near the entry to the operating room theatre. I have since concluded that they most likely did not speak to each other at all, and I was hearing both their thoughts at once via telepathy, and thought they were speaking to each other. I was hearing the surgeon's anxious thoughts to get into the operating room quickly, and the other man's thoughts worried that a person in the street clothes shouldn't be allowed into the operating room. So that's the end of Karen's experience. There's quite a bit there to unwrap. So summarizing, she has this near-death experience and is able to leave her body and see a few things that are happening in this physical realm. And she comes back and goes into quite a bit of detail there as to the investigation of what actually occurred and her interactions with the people she said she saw while she was in spiritual form, and her discussions with them as to whether or not what she saw actually happened. And she wants to get to the bottom of this in order to prove to herself that what she saw actually took place. So yeah, let's go through that again nice and slowly. So Karen is an Alaskan woman. So Alaska is a place I would like to visit one day. Coming from a country which is pretty much the opposite in climate to what Alaska is. So yeah, I live in Australia, which has, it has a wide range of climates because it's a big country, but so you've got the cooler cities, which is where I live now in Melbourne. But if you go up north, you've got the more tropical areas, and if you go more inland, you can experience desert. So where I'm from in Perth, Western Australia, it is very warm, and probably why I crave to visit a place like Alaska one day where, you get to see snow regularly, and for whatever reason, I seem pretty obsessed with cooler climates, and I think that's probably due to my exposure to so much heat and desert-like conditions in my younger years. It's, I guess it's human nature in a way to experience or need that which you don't have or haven't had a lot of, and it is certainly like that way for me anyway. I love to get away from the heat now, and I know some people enjoy it and crave it and love that sort of lifestyle, but for me, no, I don't. I love the rain, love the winter, like storms and those sort of things. So Karen's in Alaska, and she needs to get some back surgery. She says it's just for a ruptured disc. This surgery is happening back in 1977, but even so, you wouldn't have thought that a ruptured disc on your back would lead to some sort of an emergency procedure or life-threatening procedure like it does here. But as we know, because I've just read this experience, that is exactly what happens. So it sounds like Karen's a fairly religious woman. She is asked her family and friends to pray for her and to send their wishes, and even goes as far as telling her church that this is the date of her surgery. She's going to need all the support she can get, and obviously she wants the prayers to discuss or ask for a surgery that goes smoothly. So, as we know, this doesn't end up happening, but I guess maybe some of her prayers were answered in that the nurse says when she goes in, she says that Karen looks like she's the calmest person she's ever seen, about to walk in and have this back surgery. So maybe some of the prayers she received were prayers for peace and calmness and a relaxed state as the surgery approached, and obviously the day of it, it's seemingly what has happened anyway. She's in a very peaceful frame of mind as she enters the surgery. So for her, the entrance into this next dimension is not, she doesn't, like, all that happens is she has this anesthesia, and then the next thing she knows, she is no longer in her body. So it doesn't say how long after she had the anesthesia that she actually drifts into this other dimension, but yeah, so 1 minute she's alive in this physical realm, and then gets knocked out by the drugs, and then the next she's finds herself on the ceiling in the corner of the room. She's so high up there that she is right next to the tiles. So, 2-3 meters up in the air. Looking down at what's going on with her body, she sees these doctors swearing angrily. There seems to be some sort of commotion going on. The nurses being told to order more blood. There's people rushing in and out. She looks at her body. She sees that her face is very pale. But like we hear quite often in these experiences, when someone is in this other spiritual state, this other form of consciousness, there is a huge lack of connection with their actual physical body, their shell. They don't, they see this, and they see their body, and they often don't, they might not even recognize it. It might take a few moments for the penny to drop that is actually who they are, in inverted commas. And Karen's the same. She actually recognizes who she's looking at, but she doesn't feel any connection. She doesn't feel any alarm. She feels very calm and not really concerned at all as to what's happening. Just there as an awareness, really watching the scene go on, but below her. And it is at that point that she realizes she can move around even further. So she decides to move through the walls and down the hallway, and obviously doesn't need a door to open or a window to open to do this. She's able to effortlessly glide through these seemingly solid objects, and continues to tour the hospital. And as this tour goes on, she feels as though someone is sort of guiding her at this point, and as this sensation of being taken somewhere else solidifies, it starts to pull her upwards, and she starts watching one floor of the hospital go past after the other as she moves through each level, and eventually gets to the top and then finds herself in the sky above the hospital. And from there she goes even further up. She feels she gets to this height where it is roughly the same as where airplanes would be flying around. So obviously from there she's got a pretty good view of the city, and she says the mountain range, and can just see this whole wonderful place below her. The thing she doesn't notice though is she thinks, okay, so here I am, I'm up this high, I'm looking at this incredible scene below me. I still feel like me, but I don't feel any cold. Like, shouldn't I be getting a little bit chilly up this high? And I don't feel any breeze blowing around. Shouldn't there be some wind gushing past me? But yes, Karen says that there's none of this. It's just, so in other words, like her certain senses, I guess, are working and others aren't. So she can still see, but she can't experience the sensation of touch or heat and cold. So, and at this point is when the experience goes into this dimension that we find even more difficult to understand than, well, I do anyway, of then a spirit leaving the body and still being able to see. This next part of the experience is when they transfer from experience, still experiencing this physical realm on some level, and then they transport to this other place which, it leaves the physical world behind, and there's it's a totally different kettle of fish in terms of what they're seeing and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And this is the transition a lot of spirits take. Especially when they're in hospital, you see them 1 minute in the hospital room, and then the next minute they're in this incredibly beautiful landscape and accompanied by guides and sometimes Jesus and sometimes the light itself. It varies from individual to individual, but in Karen's case, she says she's moved through the hospital up to the sky, and then this is the part where she describes her tunnel. So it's a little bit different to most. The tunnel starts a little bit later, not as soon as this leaving of the body occurs. She gets a little bit of a tour of the physical realm until this tunnel starts to manifest itself. And in Karen's case, it's a cave-like tunnel. She zooms through this at high speed, and then, like we often hear almost on a weekly basis, at the end of this tunnel she can see this light, and this is the direction the tunnel is heading. So as she finally gets to this light, is when her guides and gorgeous landscapes start to materialize. And in her case, she sees firstly this guide who she's actually quite disappointed isn't actually Jesus. And I guess given Karen's, I'd say, Christian and religious background, I guess you would be a little bit disappointed that Jesus isn't there to greet you. But nonetheless, she goes into a bit of detail as to how this guide has materialized for her. She says he's got long dark hair tied behind his back. He's got a leather tie and a short toga-like garment in rough white material and sandals on his feet. And this guide takes her to this gorgeous pastoral scene of vivid green grass and vibrantly coloured flowers. And these flowers are unlike any colour she's seen before. There's trees scattered around the field, and there's a small river that runs along the ground. And then she starts to see some more beings, and these beings are all past family members, or so in her case it's their family members who have left the physical realm, and their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, grandparents who she doesn't really know. Like she says she sees them but doesn't recognize them from a visual point of view, but she can hear them telepathically, and they are communicating who they are and telling them how much that they love her. So these beings are obviously welcoming her, happy to see her, and she doesn't go into much more detail than that. So from there, the guide tells her at this point that they need to go somewhere else, and she needs to follow him. So they continue along this river that they're following, and they get to this building that looks like a Greek-style building, and in this building is more spiritual beings, and they enter what looks like a library. And in this library there's spiritual beings studying and reading and researching something called the Book of Life, which is described in the Bible, which I don't know too much about. And they continue through this library. For me, it's a little bit interesting that spiritual beings need to or continue to research what they need to read books to pick knowledge up. It seems a little bit strange, but in this dimension, I'm not going to question what anyone says, because it's always different in one way or another. And if this is what Karen saw, then why can't it be true? So from there they continue on to, it looks like, have a bit of a life review. So Karen says she sees scenes, and it's like a 3D hologram appeared, and here she gets to experience her whole life again. So she gets to see the impact of her actions and her words on those people that she has interacted with. And there's no judgment there, only the judgment she puts on herself as to how she has lived her life, which is a common theme and an important theme, I think, for us to comprehend, considering some stricter religious theories that say there's a heaven and a hell, and we are judged by God on how we conduct ourselves in this life, and that determines what part of the universe we get to explore after we've been here. this doesn't seem to be the case. I don't think I've come across one experience that has actually said that God sends them to this pit of eternal suffering for the way they have lived their life on earth. It's always, from what I've seen anyway, it's always the individual that, I don't know if, they just, when they do go to these darker realms, it's like they just end up there. It's like they feel they belong there themselves. It's like it's not someone sending them there. It's seemingly their own decision in a way to end up in these dimensions that are very undesirable. But yeah, I don't come across too many. I guess people are reluctant to share an experience like that, maybe through shame or embarrassment that they have ended up going to a hellish-like environment. Or maybe it's just not as common for people to experience these darker realms in this other dimension. But yeah, so in Karen's case, she is not in hell at all. She just is reliving her life and finding that this life review is tremendously impactful on her. She is able to see where she's gone and done well in life and seen how her actions have affected other people and I guess other animals and the planet itself. When you look at it in enough depth, you can judge everything you do, not just what you say or how you act around other people, but yeah, what you eat, whether you take drugs, whether you drink, and do you recycle? There's all kinds of factors that could be analysed, I guess, in these life reviews that go further than just the impact your actions have on other people. But for her, she's just judging herself, and like every one of these reviews, it seems to really stick in the person's mind, and they are able to, or it makes them want to change the way they conduct themselves when they come back to Earth. And I guess for all of us hearing these experiences too, it makes us consider our actions a little bit more closely, and in anticipation for our own life review one day. And obviously it's just common sense for people to conduct themselves in a way that is harmonious with the people around them. But it's not always that easy, as we all know. Sometimes you just, you get enough sleep, or you might be in a challenging situation in life, and when those situations occur, it obviously makes being a more loving person that a little bit more challenging, and makes us a little bit more likely to be mean or harsh or reactive to certain people or situations. So she has this review. It has a tremendous impact, and she's getting, while this is happening, more sort of information from these guides as to, I guess, the reasons for her even being there. And she says that she's picking up that her life has been planned before she was even born, and there have been spiritual guides to help her plan the experiences she has. So yeah, every time I read this, I'm like, wow, how can this be so? Because if you plan your whole life ahead before it even happens, that means everything's kind of destined to happen regardless of the decisions you make in this planet. But then you think, well, you hear other experiences that say, well, God gives us our free will, so how could we possibly choose the paths our lives are going to take before we even come here, knowing that when we come here we're going to go, potentially on a different course to that course that we planned in the spiritual realm. But I don't know, there are lot smarter up there, I think, and a lot more wisdom. And I guess maybe the laws of probability predict certain pathways you're going to take based on ancestral decision-making pathways, or I don't know. It's impossible for us to get our head around because we're just little humans in this little physical realm trying to figure it out. And the mysterious nature of this place is boggles your mind, and I guess I'm opening up an even bigger can of worms here by looking at this other dimension that human words lack the capabilities to even describe. So I think I am a little bit out of my depth here at times. I don't know if I can ever truly understand or why we're here, or the reasons for suffering on earth, or trying to define God. It all seems a little bit unattainable, but anyway, I continue to explore this topic with great interest, probably for that exact reason, that the answers are not easy to find. But yeah, so she's getting these ideas, or as she says, ideas that she has planned this life before she's even come down here. And she says that these guides are telling her that in the future some events, some events in her future life are definitely, no questions asked, going to occur. And some events were possible, but not definite. And it's difficult, like for the reasons I just spoke about, for me to understand how certain events are set in stone and others are possible, depending on the pathways you are going to take. But again, and I say this so often, like almost every week, there is people not so much talking about planning of the life before you come down here. I don't really talk about that every week, but every few weeks I come across an experience where this is discussed. And it's like you have these certain pointers in your life, certain landmark situations that are inescapable. And it's sort of like these pathways we take in between these bigger events are the ones that we can change with our own free will. So for example, if you're supposed to marry someone, maybe you might not, the proposal might get knocked back the first time, and then you might try it again a few years later, and eventually you'll get there. You'll eventually be able to tie the knot, but sometimes it doesn't happen the first time, and might take some recurring events for a future event to actually eventuate. I don't know. I'm getting a little bit lost even trying to think of an example to describe, so I don't want to confuse you even more, but hopefully you get the gist. And often you come across these experiences that say we have these certain points in our lives that are exit points in terms of us leaving this physical realm and entering the next dimension, and this is when we can or cannot choose to die. And it looks like Karen is in one of those situations right now, and she is in this other realm and getting this option to stay or go. So she's also showing future events in her life, and again, this is difficult to wrap my head around, but in her case, she says these events in her future life are removed from her, or told that they will be removed from her memory when she returns to her earth life, because if she was able to retain these memories, it would jeopardize the direction her future life might take, because she may or may not make decisions that would make these events avoidable. So for her, there's a few little gaps in her near-death experience when she returns to Earth. But she says the guides tell her there will be enough memory of this experience and some even signs or reminders in the physical realm that this experience of the heaven-like dimension actually happened. So with that, she wakes up. She's in the recovery room, and she realizes that her memory of a lot of what just happened in this other realm is still there. It's still strong. It's still pretty present. It's like a real memory for her. It's very fresh in her mind. And this isn't the sign, though. This isn't the sign that the guides told her would be there to prove to her that she has been in this other realm and she has experienced God. For her, she gets this blissful like state of ecstasy that is completely enveloping her, and she says the best way to describe this is using I think it's a Bible phrase, is it? The peace that passeth all understanding, and it is the unconditional love of God, and it is like an invisible bubble of protection. And she says this afterglow, I guess, that some people use to describe what this is like, lasts for 3 weeks. So this isn't the drugs, people. This isn't the anesthetic or the painkillers that are making her feel so loved and joy, because it lasts for 3 weeks. It's not an after effect of the operational medication. It is, she says, something much nicer. So she says it's like a gift of God's love, and not only is it helping her cope with the situation of her damaged body, but it's also giving her the proof of what just happened to her. It is the sign that she has been somewhere special and has been able to retain some of that magic within her soul or within a spirit, and that is somehow emanating through to the physical realm and affecting her physical body and giving her healing properties and a state of well-being that goes beyond what any medication can do. So she's in hospital for 12 days after this surgery. It was touch and go whether she lived or died, and the doctors were worried about her after this operation, but she says she was always confident that it was never going to be a fatal situation, because she chose to come back here and she's seen memories of her future life, and she knows by obtaining this information from this other realm that this operation is not going to be the reason for her to permanently leave this dimension. So this experience happened back in 1977, and back then, obviously, there wasn't much information on near-death experiences, and you would have been called super crazy if you spoke about this at all. And it's still, people still think you are crazy when you talk about it today, but back then it would have been even less discussed. So she is even reluctant to tell her family at first about what happened, and obviously anyone else as well, including the doctors. So then she starts talking about how she is able to prove what happened to herself and to her family by reliving those moments of when she left her body, and she's able to see the doctor who operated on her. She's able to see what he's wearing, who he's talking to, and what was happening in the operating room in terms of there being commotion. And it goes into a little bit of detail here as to how she goes about that. But yeah, I won't dig back into that again. It's pretty straightforward, really. Just her talking talking to the doctors about what they wore, what they said, and then her family, and just sort of putting it all together. And her end conclusion is, so look, she did see what was going on while she was in this spiritual form, and able to witness her procedure from another perspective, and that being the spiritual one. So there you have it. There's Karen's experience of the light. Every experience is always a little bit different. I think God comes to us all individually, and tailors the experience to the culture and beliefs we have in a way that is the best to get through to us, and that, I guess, partly explains why there's so many different religions and spiritual practices in the world. It just depends on where you're born as to what you think God is and how that can be experienced. And it's God. It is such a interesting yet frustrating topic because of the inability to clearly understand exactly how to describe that, because there's so many different viewpoints. But at the end of the day, I'm starting to form my own, and God for me is the source and the light and the love, and this is how I like to define it anyway. But that doesn't mean that the way you define it or you experience it is wrong or right, or I don't think there is such a thing. It's all different for each individual, and if these near-death experiences are to be believed, which I do, it's like there is part of that. It is kind of blocked or hidden or removed or more difficult to know and experience than it is in this other spiritual realm. So Karen had parts of her future life removed from her memory. So if a spiritual being is able to block certain aspects of information out from it, obviously there's probably a whole lot more stuff out there that we as spiritual beings know but aren't privy to while we're in this physical form, which is why it kind of confused me when Karen saw these spiritual beings in a library, reading, researching, learning. But it's all very confusing and so many questions. So although these experiences might actually answer the occasional question, they also put up another dozen for every one that is answered. So but if we are to believe what these experiences say, then one day we will get all the questions to all the answers we've ever had answered, and that is a day I'm looking forward to, but it's probably not going to be as satisfying as it would seem to be, I guess, in a physical sense, because basically you just, when you get all these answers, you're in this spiritual form and you've known all these answers all along. So it's it's just frustrating because I want all these answers now, but I guess we just have to wait and be patient and enjoy not knowing. Just enjoy not knowing. And maybe that's a blessing in itself, is having a break from knowing everything. It sounds weird, but possible. So many possibilities. So thank you for listening. I love you all. Be good, and talk to you next week. Take care.